And somehow, like through some weird way, I landed like this marketing job with truly no experience with. I was working at a sushi restaurant. So I was like, why are you hiring me? I don't understand, but thank you.
We've been called a lot of things. And we're inspired by everything around us, including each other. The individuals that have inspired me the most create beauty and positive change. To me, that's the highest form of art, and it deserves the loudest praise. This is Shoutout, the art of self-expression. On this episode of Shoutout, the wedding, landscape, and fine art photographer, Danielle Kelley.
I'm always looking at my surroundings, and I'm always feeling inspired by what I see outside the window. So I kind of get all these like hidden vacations, which is another huge perk to the job for someone that likes to travel as much as I do. I went to Cambodia and met a group of other aspiring photographers there from all over the world. So we spent time there. We just went into these communities and like documented what their life was like. It just doesn't feel like work. I'm so excited to drive 2 hours to get to the venue. I'm so excited to see my clients that I've been working with essentially like all year long. And I'm just really excited to do the actual work for them. Love lines. I love finding the angles in a room. I love the weird patterns on like corporate carpet. Sometimes I'm not even doing it on purpose. It's just, I tend to find the lines in a room. There's the hyper responsible side of me, and there's this side that like thrives in chaos and thrives with the unknown. And I love kind of not knowing where I'm going to go in a year.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here and doing this. I really appreciate it.
No, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to kind of just start at the very beginning of how this whole journey into photography began. So if you could kind of start with like your early childhood and where it all started.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in a house where my brother and my dad were absolutely the artists of the family. They were the creative ones. And kind of just watching them as I was growing up, like they kind of collaborated on a bunch of things. They were always kind of collaborating on art, but I could only at that time in my life think about being an artist in the medium of drawing and sketching. And that was just like my relationship with what I thought an artist was. And I never really identified with feeling creative or being creative at that time, but we had a really amazing childhood as kids. And I always like to think that somehow that played into a little bit of who I am today. And like such a visceral memory I have of being a kid is like, I went to this co-op preschool, and my parents were really involved in that because in order to participate in that school, the parents had to like give a lot of their time and help out at the school. But in exchange of them helping, the rates were like very low. So we all went to this school as kids, but the school's philosophy was like, you're a kid, you should be messy, you should get dirty. Parents bring multiple change of clothes for your kids because it's just going to be madness in here, basically. And so I have just the memory of being a kid and getting like really messy and coloring and painting, but in really interesting, like abstract ways for a child. And it was kind of a school that had no rules. It wasn't like, they didn't do any kind of like behavior correction or anything like that. But I just remember feeling like, this is what it means to be a kid. And like flash forward to, going to high school and following like a really traditional path of education. And, I did community college in Roseville at Sierra, then transferred to San Diego State, finished college there, and then kind of just got to that, again, really traditional crossroads of like, this is when I start my career, because, you know, I finished school and that's what people do and that's what you should do. And I moved to San Francisco at that point. I wanted to be a little bit closer to home. I had kind of done all I needed to do in San Diego, and that was such a fun life. And I lived a little bit of those college years, and I was just ready. I was ready to do something else. But in my mind at that time, that was just follow the traditional path, because that's probably what you've already set yourself up to do. So moved to San Francisco, and somehow, like through some weird way, I landed like this marketing job with truly no experience with. I was working at a sushi restaurant. So there, I was like, why are you hiring me? I don't understand, but thank you. And I just had it in my head that that was like the pinnacle of my career. Like I was starting this marketing journey, and yeah, maybe that's where I was supposed to be. And I had my own apartment in San Francisco. So it was like a really kind of like romantic life at that time. I had scratched that itch of like, I'm in this big city by myself. I got myself here, and now it's like career time, and I'm going to be like a career woman. And I was there for a while and loved my colleagues and loved that job for like a little bit. And what felt really scary to me was like, I had so many, and maybe you've been in this position before, like true out of body experiences where you're like, oh, I get how this is going to go for myself. I'm going to do this job until I die. Like I'm just going to rot at this job. But that seems to be what people do. And again, that's like the traditional thing to do. Why am I having such a like an internal reaction to this? What does that mean for me? Oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I don't think I'm this person. In the interim of the marketing job and like finishing college, I had this moment of like, just this weird leap of faith where I was like, I think I'm going to do something really rash and dramatic. And I think I'm going to go to Cambodia right now. And I had never done anything like that before. I had never left the country. And somehow I had it in my mind. I was going to go to this third world country, and I was going to join this photography quest led by this like prestigious photographer who lived in Cambodia. And I knew nothing else. Like everything.
Oh wait, hold on. How did you come to that conclusion? Was this somebody that like you had found online and just like saw their work, or like how did this come to you?
I think I actually Googled photography quest. Didn't even know that was a thing. That was just in my head. And I was like, I think this is called a photography quest. And mind you, I wasn't a photographer, didn't have a camera. I had one of those like pocket cameras that I meant that everybody had. It wasn't anything you could take like a really seriously great picture on. But I was just kind of the person that brought their camera to parties, like actual parties, and took pictures of people just for my own enjoyment. I took pictures of people's like shoes, and I meant really garbage material. Like, but I still was like really fascinated with, I remember the feeling of like taking the memory card out and like plugging that into my computer and then editing, again, really shitty photos. But I was really fascinated with just like that little manipulation of, this is a garbage photo, but I think I can make this somehow a little bit more interesting. And then anyway, I took just that base level of interest and wanted to do something just a little bit next step, I guess. Googled photography quest. And this trip came up, and it was in Cambodia. And I just don't know where I got the confidence to do that, but I booked the trip and like didn't have a passport, anything. And and all of this does make sense, I guess, with like my personality. There is like a hyper responsible part of my personality where I truly want to do things the right way. And I don't want to ruffle any feathers, and I don't want to disappoint anybody with my decisions. And then there's the other part of me that really desperately wants to like hold on to like the free spirit that I feel like I've always been. So went to Cambodia. Yeah. Went to Cambodia and met a group of other aspiring photographers there from all over the world. And it was like a 2-week excursion essentially. And we just went around Cambodia to different villages and documented like the community there. Essentially, we went to orphanages, we spent time there, we just went into these communities and like documented what their life was like. And it was wildly amazing. It was one of the coolest things I still have ever done. That really kind of scratched the surface of like, I think I want to travel too. I think I'm discovering like this new part of my identity where I do want to see what's out there. And all I've ever known is that like square radius of like Roseville and College Town. And like, I just was really ready to branch out, and then came home from that trip. And this was like MySpace years. So I took a lot of those photos, edited them, and I had those. You remember when MySpace was like the banners of your profile, you could put photos on?
Yeah, you could like customize everything.
Yeah, so I just put a lot of my work out there. And somebody that I had played soccer with had reached out to me and said, I know that you don't shoot weddings, but like, will you shoot mine? And it was somebody that I knew. Such a scary request. Like, I was not even sure that that was something I was capable of doing at all. And again, that's somebody's wedding day. So that day was like top 10 most terrifying days of my life. Because again, I hadn't had what one would call like actual training whatsoever. What I did in Cambodia was just follow this photographer and kind of pick up things here and there, but nothing was technical about that trip. I never learned how to use a camera in a technical way. And still to this day, I would never say I'm a technical photographer. So to shoot that wedding, I kind of went into it thinking like, just kind of try to preserve the way that you shot everything in Cambodia, which was really just photojournalists. Like, that was photojournalism right there. It was just documenting, and nothing was contrived, nothing was posed. It was just exactly as it was. So I shot her wedding kind of in that same lens, and I loved it. I loved that energy. I almost loved the adrenaline, and I loved how those photos turned out. And she did too. It was a great first experience, thankfully. And then it kind of, in a strange way, it was a domino effect from that point. Like, I shot a wedding only like a few months later than that. And that was also for a friend. And I think that's kind of how that could work for someone. Like, they just start showing off their work a little bit more. A lot of people started contacting me at that point with, again, these were like really small scale weddings. It was people that I still knew. Some I knew really intimately, and they were close friends of mine. So I started feeling more and more confident to do that completely on the side of what I was doing at the marketing agency. And what felt like what was happening, and I think a lot of people that, again, maybe have like an entrepreneurial spirit or want to run their own business probably come to this kind of crossroads of like, I do something to bring in the income, and I do something that I love on the side. But the something that I'm doing to bring in the income is somehow becoming miserable to me. And that's what was happening. I had just kept booking these weddings on the side. I saved all of that income. I didn't spend that money. And then the goal was just to slowly figure out like how I could transition to doing what I loved full time. Yeah, and that was a really terrifying process for me. And it kind of goes back to that part of my personality that is the hyper responsible, like, does this let anybody down? Does this let my parents down? Like, nobody probably would have assumed that I would take this leap of faith in this way. And this sounds scary. And like, there's no benefits or medical or retirement. And like all these, I was like, 20, 23, but that was how my brain was working. And I think when you come from a family like I have, my parents have given essentially like everything to us kids. And all of us have this complex of like really wanting to please our parents. Like my sister has it, my brother has it. And it feels like the only way to give back to them is to make them proud. And I think somewhere along the line, like along the way, I got it in my head that to do something like this that I love could potentially maybe be a disappointment when somebody like my parents might think that I should take the traditional career path. So long story short, I had finally hit like this financial goal of what I was bringing in through photography. And I told myself that I can quit my job once I hit that amount. And if nobody hired me ever again, then I could still survive for like X amount of days. There was like a whole math equation that I had worked out. And that day was terrifying when I went into my boss's office. And again, very out of body experience of like sitting in that chair and telling him that I was going to quit, that like I was so thankful for my time there. And I had a really, really close relationship with my boss too. I started off as like his assistant and furnished his like Tahoe rental like the first week of work there. I had really weird odd jobs that I did for him until I became like this marketing manager. So anyway, that day was terrifying. And then I just remember it was like the next day, and after my 2 weeks were up, and it would have been a day that I would have gone to work and walked to work at 8:30 in the morning. And I just like walked to the park down the street from my apartment in San Francisco. And it was like a beautiful, perfect day. And I just sat on this blanket at the park and couldn't believe like that I had done that. And it was like this weird half like grief, but half like total excitement. Like the world is my oyster. This is my time to just figure out what it is that I actually want to do beyond what anybody else would want for me. Like, what do I really want for this, So that is kind of like the history of how I got to be full-time with my photography business. And that all happened I went full-time in 2013. So far, so good. It's been great. It's been a really wild, wild journey.
It doesn't sound like you regret that decision at all. It was very scary at the time, but how do you feel about it now?
I'm still so proud of that version of me, like that younger version of me that did that, because sometimes I think about like, what if I didn't do that? Mm-hmm. And I have like 2 kids now, and my life is a lot different than when I was 23 years old. And I feel like that was a good time to make that decision. That is the time that I know now you can, make mistakes, and you can change your trajectory at any time and recover from that. And I feel so glad that I did that then, because I think as the older I've gotten, that decision would have been like heavier and heavier. And it would have felt, I think, more and more out of reach. So I feel really good that I did it. I have no regrets. It's crazy how I feel like this has continued to be like such a huge gift from the universe. Like there's like times where I've been like, I actually need to book something soon. I kind of need to book something. And in that moment, something will just pop up into my inbox. And my husband and I are talking about this because I have a pretty bad habit at this point of like checking my email really consistently. And like it's the first thing I do in the morning. And he doesn't understand that because he's like, that's what you want to look at first thing in the morning is like basically your to-do list. And I was like, everything that comes in this inbox are like, they're opportunities for me. Like I'm excited about every email I get. And that's how I know I love what I do.
What is the aspect that you love most about what you do?
I really love the unpredictability of it all. Again, like the hyper responsive, there's the hyper responsible side of me. And there's this side that like thrives in chaos and thrives with the unknown. And I love kind of not knowing where I'm going to go in a year as far as like location and travel. And I have kind of just a really on the go lifestyle. I love that I get to spend Monday through Friday and still weekends with my kids. And I'm with them every waking minute. But then on the weekends, when I typically do shoot a wedding, I get like it feels like a whole day to myself, but I am like really still exploring my craft always. So like, it feels like a day in which I get to like tap into that part of my brain that I don't get to satiate throughout the week just because I'm in mom mode. So it's like this whole part too that I get to do, and it just doesn't feel like work. I'm so excited to get out of the house. I'm so excited to drive 2 hours to get to the venue. I'm so excited to see my clients that I've been working with essentially like all year long. And I'm just really excited to do the actual work for them.
Okay, so you show up to a location. What specifically are you kind of looking for? You very first show up. Have you already done homework? What does that look like?
I typically don't do venue walkthroughs beforehand, only because I actually just would never have the time to do that. Instead, what I do is I show up like an hour or two before coverage time starts, and that's where I can map things out. And I always tell clients, like sometimes they say, would you be willing to do a venue walkthrough? And I tell them, like, honestly, what's going to be a better depiction of your wedding day is the day of. Like, I could go to your wedding venue and it could be, I could see obstacles that day that just wouldn't exist on the day of your wedding. So I would get a better understanding of what the obstacles are the day that I'm there, the weather for that day, where cars are going to be. And so that's why I show up like 1 to 2 hours early, and I like survey the property. And by the time coverage starts, like I really know what story I want to tell at that point. That's kind of where I have to have that like alone time of when I show up at the venue and almost just like be in my own thoughts at that time. Walking around, kind of like just getting a feel for the layout of the day, and then figuring out like, how can I make this day, how can I make this space feel like me? How can I be the photographer that they hired here, kind of thing?
Looking through your work, I have been extremely impressed with the compositions that you choose, and just the overall tone, like the color palette that I see you use. It feels like almost like a patina, and has kind of like just this classic vibe to it. Are you pulling reference from like any one source, or where are you getting your style from?
It's such a good question. I don't really look at other photographers' work, almost on purpose, because I don't actually accidentally want to pull too much from what they're already doing. It's not that I don't look at other photographers' work, but I just try not to draw a ton of influence from anything like that. But I go through phases. Like, I mean, I'm a huge fan of anything Wes Anderson. I love that color palette.
Yes.
I feel like I really identify with being kind of a quirky photographer, but not really in a silly way, but I love lines. I love finding the angles in a room. I love the weird patterns on like corporate carpet. And I like to make art out of unconventional things. And that's when I feel most alive, is like, especially if I'm shooting at what appears to be like a very stale venue, or again, maybe like a country club that hasn't updated anything. So they have that like crazy carpet or exit signs everywhere. And like, again, these could be obstacles for me in a day, but I desperately try to reframe that. I try to think, this is the canvas I have. There's nothing I can do to change this. How can I make this look artistic? And how can I deliver the way I know my client wants me to? And I just feel like I go into the day with this confidence that doesn't exist in my regular life when I'm not a photographer, but in the life of being a photographer, I just go into the day knowing that I'm gonna like show up. I'm gonna show up because they hired me to do that. Yeah, and I spend so much time driving with my children, and something that I do without even thinking of it is like, I'm always looking at my surroundings, and I'm always feeling inspired by what I see outside the window. And like underpasses and billboards and like lines and pillars and industrial and like parking garages, like all those things totally inspire me. I think this looks like a really unassuming spot, and this is a place where I couldn't bring every client, but like, I know what client I'm going to bring into this parking garage, and I know I'm going to like nail it with them. So it's mostly about like finding the right clients and knowing that whatever client hires me, they've like absolutely have given me their trust to shoot the day in the way that I see it. So the inspiration kind of comes like in a really organic way. Sometimes it surprises me. Sometimes I'm not even doing it on purpose. It's just, I tend to find the lines in a room.
It almost seems like a game that you're constantly enjoying, constantly playing, looking for and seeing. And again, like I see it in your work. I'm like, she knows composition very well. What are some of the common challenges that you face on a shoot?
It's a good question. I feel like there's a lot of personalities involved in what I do. I mean, I don't think any wedding photographer is really like this, but we don't just show up and shoot and leave. We are such an integral part of the wedding day. And at that point, like at the actual wedding day, we've already done months and months and months of communication. And the day has been so orchestrated at this point. And there's a point of contact that isn't me there, obviously, like running the show, but there's a ton of people involved beyond that. It's family members, it's the mother of the bride. And I've had almost every experience in the book at this point. But learning that this job is so much more than being the photographer, I have to be like the diffuser of a lot of situations a lot of the time. And the way I look at it is like, there's so much energy in that day. There is, again, the mother of the bride that is beyond excited that her only daughter is getting married. But she's almost so excited that it is bringing on a bunch of other parts of her personality. And some might think that person is really difficult or whatever, but it's mostly like, I feel like I I'm trying to always manage the energy from other people so my clients don't feel any of that. And I read the room when things maybe do get a little bit hectic, or like, maybe the parents aren't married anymore and they have a terrible relationship, and the bride and groom have already disclosed that to me. So we've already had a secret conversation about what I need to do to essentially keep them like out of that,
Yeah.
So it's a lot of managing too. It's not something that I think I would have known at all going into it, but just making sure that my clients feel comfortable. Sometimes again, there's like in the industry, they call it like Uncle Bob, who, when the bride and groom are kissing at the end of the ceremony, and he stands up with his iPad and he's taking a picture on his iPad. It's not even a phone anymore. It's a freaking iPad. And things like that, where you're like, this is so annoying that this is happening, and it happens all the time. So just little things like that, where I wish we as photographers can make like a louder statement about, just let us do the work here. We've got the day covered. Like, everybody leave your iPad at home.
What are some of the locations that you've shot that have just been mind-blowing?
I will never forget shooting a wedding in a castle in this tiny town in Sweden. That blew my mind. I have shot a wedding recently in Greece that I still haven't been able to process. And I'm still upset that I'm back from that trip. Yeah, Sweden was the top one. And then, yeah, just recently Greece. I'm negotiating a vow renewal in Kenya for June, and that would be huge. And then, I've done Mexico. I'm doing Mexico this month for a wedding, which is always fun. I mean, I still don't have it in me to just go to a destination and shoot a wedding and come home. Like, I'm always like, I'll naturally turn this into a vacation. So I kind of get all these like hidden vacations, which is what another huge perk to the job for someone that likes to travel as much as I do.
What advice would you give someone that's looking to get into photography?
I think, going into it, I did do what felt like a lot of free work. And I think, if there's a way that you can get around that, that's great. But I think in order to really show a rich portfolio, you need to shoot a lot, and you need to shoot a lot of different things. And there was a point in my career where I kind of realized and recognized like the control I could have in what my portfolio would look like. So instead of waiting for a lot of opportunities to come to me, I wanted to reframe that as far as creating opportunities essentially, and building my portfolio that way. So either finding a friend or contacting an agency saying like, this is my vision for this styled shoot, putting that together. I've gotten a lot of my work featured for that purpose, to, build the styled shoot, submit it to publications, get it featured, and all that stuff was a lot of work. And again, a lot of free work that I was doing, but it really helped to enrich this portfolio. I would suggest that. And I have talked to like countless other photographers that are in or were in that same position of like, I love to do this and I want to do this full time, but I just don't get it logistically, and I don't get how to do it financially. And not that my story is like seamless. And of course it came with bumps in the road, but I do like to encourage people to take that leap And I meant in my situation, it was a pretty calculated leap. And I do share the part of, what do you think about trying to save up that goal money, knowing that if you say goodbye to like your full-time job, you can still eat. Like, instead of just, leaping and hoping the net will appear, you actually kind of have a plan. And I will never, ever forget this moment in my life where, and I've shared this story before, but I don't know if I've even had any other moment close to this, but I watched some commencement speech on YouTube, and it was Jim Carrey.
Yes. And
do you know what I'm talking about? And it changed my effing life. I don't know what it was. Nothing else has ever motivated me more that YouTube Jim Carrey speech. And for those that haven't seen it, what he is talking about is basically he gives this background story on how growing up, his dad was actually the real comedian of the family, and that his dad actually could have had the same career essentially that he had. And his dad could have done stand-up, and his dad could have done this. And in that speech, you can see that he truly idolized his dad. And then he said, but my dad chose the safe job. My dad chose whatever it was. I think do you remember what it was?
He was doing, I want to say he was doing like accounting work at like a factory or something in Canada.
Wow, you really have watched that one. Yeah, that's so crazy. Yeah, and he is just explaining that his dad took that route, and his dad was really unhappy doing that. And then his dad lost the safe job. And then he kind of, on the tail end of that speech, says something along the lines of, you can fail at the safe job too, so do what you love. And my mind was just like, I could fail at the safe job.
Yeah.
And that was such a huge driving force. It was like, for whatever reason, the biggest motivator for me, because it's true.
Yeah.
It's really important for me individually to love what I do. And I have too many people in my life that I love that hate what they do. And they spend so much time hating their lives. And I know that. And it makes me really sad for them. I feel really lucky and privileged to do what I do. And I don't take it for granted at all, and I don't think I want to be like a 50-year-old wedding photographer, but right now this is still working for me, and I love it.
You had mentioned that you were actively seeking out opportunities for clients that you wanted, and doing work that you wanted to do, but you were doing it for free to build your portfolio in the direction that you wanted to go. How did the transition occur between you doing that for free to you getting paid doing that kind of work?
I think, from the free work that I was doing, once I did headshots for someone for free, once I did something else for someone for free, those weren't really clients that were mine at that point. It was just something that I was offering. So once I had, again, those images that I shot for free, that became my website. That became what people saw. So once people were reaching out at all from my website, at that point, I wasn't offering anything for free. I just finally had the material. I finally had something to show for. And that took a really long time. At one point, my website had pictures of what I took in Cambodia, which my website was just hectic. It was like all the pictures I've ever taken, like all the best ones.
Yeah.
I don't know. Am I wedding photographer? I don't know. Like, it was just all out there. And eventually, once I shot that one wedding, my first wedding, I had 500 images of a wedding and almost enough abstract shots where I could piece it together to not make it look like my website was just one wedding. Yeah. And that's what I kept doing with every new wedding, I'd update my website and just try to make it seem like there was a lot of diversity. And there was, I mean, if anybody looked at it, they would think, okay, this is clearly a wedding photographer. She shoots a lot of weddings. When in my mind, I'm like, that's 2 weddings that I have just like organized very strategically on my website. If I think this job still has this, and this is like a feeling that I'm always trying to reject. And maybe you can attest to this, but like that imposter syndrome is so hard to fight. And it's so hard. I feel like I'm in a much better place with it now because I really, again, I do this full time. This is not like gig work for me, but for the longest time, even when someone would hire me, I would be like, but why? Like, don't they know that I still don't know what I'm doing? And like, I mean, do you ever feel like that?
Oh yeah, yeah. And that's something that like I've had, I mean, in recent years, not so much because I've been in the role that I've been in for a while at work. And so you get that training and you've done it a million times and you finally look back and you're like, I've been thinking about this kind of stuff, about storytelling, about video editing, about producing for 15, 20 years. And if you ever get the opportunity to, you know, speak with someone else that is like creative, but like maybe coming from a different discipline, and then you see that look in their eyes, like, I have no idea what you're talking about with your specific craft, then you're like, I really do know what I'm doing. But it's almost like you need to, I mean, maybe it's just a thing like being a creative person and being, you know, emotionally open, that we kind of leave ourselves susceptible to feeling that imposter syndrome, where if you are doing a job that maybe you don't like, that doesn't even come into your mind because you're like, well, I hate doing this. So I don't like, I am doing this. I don't want to be doing this. So imposter syndrome is not part of the equation, maybe in that situation, but.
Yeah. And I mean, with probably everything you create and everything that I create, it's very close to me. I'm very attached to what I'm creating. I mean, by virtue of me creating it, and my name is over it. And I have like just a few mantras that I just have to go through in my head before I start like a given wedding day. And really one of them is, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And I just get like, when I'm moments away from the venue, I just get that like day of jitters. And it happens every time. It's just like moments before I'm about to start my work day. And then I just do that. Like, you know what you're doing. You are qualified. And then even when I send the gallery, the final images to my client, I have that like, I'm a little nervous. But then I tell myself, you did the work and you did the job and you did the best you could. Like, in that sense, it's objective, you know, like there's just these weird micro fears attached to something when you were all the way in it like that, you know, and when you're so close to every project, there's those just little micro fears because all of them are also attached to really wanting to please people, really wanting to make people happy.
Yeah. No, I love hearing that like kind of behind the scenes stuff, because those are things that I do like before I go into like a big situation. Recently we did a conference at work, and it's like heading into 3 days of intense work. And I mean, and quite honestly, I'm like, that's a lot of pressure. And I'm going into it, I'm like, all right, you have to like go into that zone of calming yourself down. And I think everyone has their own little rituals that help them, and it's cool to hear yours.
Yeah.
Anybody you would want to give a shout out to that's helped you along your way or inspired you?
Oh, I have so many. I mean, I think about that photographer who led that trip to Cambodia all the time. His name was John Ryder. He was the first photographer whose work had ever moved me. And I, at this point in my career, like look back and think like, I can't believe that I got to shadow that person in a really backwards way. Like I just came on that trip with low expectations. I didn't know how to use my camera. Like I was pushing buttons at the same time, thinking it was like a Nintendo controller. Like I did not know what I was doing, but that person impacted my career. And then, you know, like there's people in my everyday life. Like, I mean, my husband is wildly supportive. He is the person managing everything when I leave. You know, I have everything like dialed during the week, and then mom leaves on weekends, and it does kind of put things into disarray at home, but he's always there for that. I mean, again, I oftentimes am like, hey, this Kenya trip, it's in a couple months. Can I go? And he always says yes. He's so supportive of what I do. And I think it's really so sweet that he is someone that's like, I have a 9-to-5 and it's really grueling and it kind of sucks my soul, but I'm so happy to see what you do. I'm so supportive of what you do. And, yeah, he's kind of always been like my hype man, you know? Yeah. And I mean, my family too, like my parents have done everything that they could for us kids. And even though we didn't follow the path that maybe they wanted for us, or again, that traditional path, I know that they're really proud of me. I know that they have seen me grow as a human and me take these big leaps and all things that they probably wouldn't have assumed that I'd be comfortable doing. But like, this is just who I am and who I've been for so long. And they've been nothing but supportive of that. And again, they help watch my kids when I'm in Sweden and my husband's with me, you know, and that's been wonderful.
Well, thanks so much for spending time here and sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. That was so sweet of you to even think of me and to reach out. Thank you.
Shoutout is an Ellering Stories production. For more episodes, visit elleringstories.com.